So let's quickly recap what we've done in the last couple of lectures. First, we added this color field, and then using WP add inline styles, we added some inline styles to our websites in order to override some of our original styles to use this color field. So if we, in the iframe, which represents our website, open the head tag, we will find our inline styles here. And by changing this color, by default, the customizer will reload the iframe, and therefore these styles will be updated. But we further improved this experience by using the post message technique and replacing the styles inside the style tag using JavaScript. And to do that, we had to duplicate the CSS string that we created in PHP. We had to duplicate it using JavaScript. So in this lecture, we need to figure out a way in order to avoid this duplication. Especially if you are working in a large template, the CSS string here could be very large, and it's kind of impractical to keep these two strings in sync. So what I'm proposing is defining our CSS styles just in the PHP, and then passing the PHP to the JavaScript, and WordPress provides a way to do that. So to pass variables from PHP to JavaScript, WordPress provides a function called WP localize script. So in the enqueueassets.php file, and what we need to do is when we enqueue our customized preview file, which is this one, we need to make a PHP variable available here, which is the CSS strings that we want to add here. So to do that, before or after enqueuing the customized preview file, we can call a function called, and this is kind of similar to the add inline style. This time it's called WP localize script, and it also takes a handle, and this is the handle of the JavaScript file that you want the PHP variable to be available in. So we want our PHP variable to be available in customized preview file, so we'll give it this handle, and the object name is a JavaScript object that will contain all your variables. So let's call this theme name, and we'll use this object to put any PHP variables that we would like to pass from PHP to JavaScript. And you'll see more what I mean in a moment. And in the last argument, you pass an array of variables that you would like to be available inside this object. So let's add a variable x, and it will be equals to 3. And now let's go back to our customizer and refresh it. And let's inspect the iframe, this one, and then go to the end of the body where we have our JavaScript files. So as you can see, we have our customized preview.js file, and right before it, WordPress added this var theme name and then the object with our variables. So we have x and 3. So now if we inside this file, let's try and do this now. In customized preview, let's console log theme name, and let's now open our console and refresh, and we have an object with x equals to 3. So this way we can instead of 3 we can pass any PHP variable, right? So let's try and let's keep this console, and let's go to the enqueue assets. And let's include the same file inline CSS to make it to make the variable available in this function. And instead of 3, let's now pass the variable, which is inline styles. And we're consoling the theme name object, so let's see what we've got now. And as you can see, we have our PHP string here, which is this one. We've managed to pass it in the JavaScript file. So you might think, alright, I'm gonna use this theme name.x, a string, and replace the inline styles with it, like so, in the customized preview. You might think, okay, I'm gonna remove this and replace the CSS inside the inline styles with theme name.x. So let's see. And let's try to change it, and nothing happens. And that's because we are replacing the inline styles with this string, and this string is already created using the original color. And it won't change when we change the accent color, because it's a JavaScript variable that is already created. We haven't done anything to update this color. So what we're doing is we are basically let's console log theme name.x here and refresh and change it. And whenever we change it, we get the same string. So what we're doing is we're basically adding the same string to the inline styles again and again. So nothing is happening. So we still haven't solved our problem here. We still need a way to regenerate these CSS styles in the JavaScript and updating the color as we change it here. So to do that, I came up with an idea. Instead, inside inline CSS.php, instead of constructing the CSS string like so, I'm going to create a variable and I'm going to call it inline styles selectors, and this is going to be an array, and this array will contain the CSS selectors, the a tag and the focus and the post tick and so on, and these will be the keys of the array. We'll have the a tag as a key, and then as a value we'll have another array, and this array will have a key of the CSS property, so color, and the value of the setting name, and you will see why I did that in a moment. So let's add the rest of them the same way. So we have the focus as a key and a value, an array with the outline color, and also the same thing. So I'm now done creating the array of selectors with the properties and the setting name. And now instead of creating the inline styles string like so, let's comment this out, and we will create it by looping through this array and constructing our CSS. So let's define this variable again, but now as an empty string, and then we'll loop through our array and append to the empty string as we go. So let's create a for each loop, and we need to loop through the inline styles selectors, and the key will be the selector. So the selector will be the A and focus and so on, and the value will be the props, and by props I mean CSS props. So they will be the array of the color and the setting name. So now inside the loop we can append to the inline styles variable. So what we will append is the selector, and then open a curly braces for the CSS. So the selector will basically be replaced by the a tag in this case in the first iteration, and then let's append the closing curly braces for the CSS, and followed by space for the next one. So what will be in the middle between the opening and the closing of the CSS selector? We will loop through the array of props. So in our case, each array will contain one key, but it may contain more. So let's do a for each loop again, and this time we need to loop through the value, which is props, and each key will be a prop, and the value, let's keep it as value, and then we will append the prop, and then the value of the prop. So what will be the value of the prop? We will concatenate it using the dot, because we'll have to type a PHP function here. What PHP function? Is getThemeMod. So in our case, what will be the name of the field? This one, which is the value in our array. So we are looping through this array, for example. So we have this key, which is the prop, and its value is the setting name. So this will be here. So let's add the value and the default, which was this one in the commented code. And also don't forget to sanitize as we did in the old code here. And our semicolon. So if you're still confused, take your time to look at this loop and understand what it does. And what it does is it just basically creates the string, but from this array instead of just adding it in the string. And we'll know why later in a moment. So let's save now and see if this is still working. So to check that, we are passing the inline styles here in the inline style. So let's go to the source. And let's make sure, and as you can see here inside the inline CSS, we have created our string. And if you took a closer look, it's the same one as this one. So you're probably wondering now, why are we doing this? And this string was working fine. Why are we looping and constructing the string this way? Let's remove this old code. Now we can pass this array to JavaScript, and using JavaScript we will do this exact same loop, and we will reconstruct the CSS string by using the updated accent color value. So let's do that and it will become much clearer. So now we want to pass the inline styles selectors to the JavaScript. So in QAssets, instead of passing inline styles, we will pass the array of selectors. And instead of X, let's call it inline CSS and save. And don't worry when you pass in a PHP array here, the WP localized script will take care of converting it to a JavaScript object. So let's see now our console and the theme name object. So we have now inline CSS, and it's a JavaScript object with our CSS selectors as keys and the properties as values. So it's basically the same exact thing as the PHP. So what can we do with this now? Let's go back to the customize preview file, and let's mimic this PHP loop, but this time in JavaScript. So okay, we are repeating ourselves in this loop, but we will repeat this loop once instead of repeating the whole CSS string that we used to use before. So let's now remove this and this, and let's create a new variable. So inline CSS, and it will be an empty string. And let's write a for in loop, and the for in loop will loop through a JavaScript object like this one. So it takes the key, which is the selector in our case. So for keys in our object, which is theme name and inline CSS, and we do the same thing. We will append the property name and the open curly braces. Just JavaScript will take a $sign and a backtick, of course, instead of the double quote, and the selector, and open the curly braces, and then let's close it. Let's remove the let, we already defined the variable, and then let's loop through the properties. So another for loop, for in loop, and this time the key will be the property in, and for each iteration we will need to get the properties object for this selector, so this one and so on. And to get this, we will access the inline CSS object and the current key, which is the current selector in this loop. So since we will use this a lot, let's define a variable for it. Let's call it inline CSS objects, and let's use it here. instead of typing this whole thing every time. So now we have the property, which will be these values: border, left color, outline color, and so on. And we need to get the theme name accent color, which is the setting name. So how to get this in JavaScript? Let's define a variable called value or val. So we need the current properties object for our current selector. The inline CSS object is this whole object, and the selector is the current selector, which is one of these: post sticky and focus and A. So this way we are accessing each of these values, the whole object. And we need the theme accent color, so we need to access this key, right? And this key in our case will be the prop. So let's add it. So the val now will contain the setting name. So this is the most important part. Let's now append the property. So we need the property name, and then for the CSS syntax, a colon, and then the value for this property. So how do we get the value for this property? And we have the setting, only the setting name, and the setting name is this val. So the WP customize API provides a way to do this. So wp.customize, and we give it the setting name, which is val, and then we call a function called .get, and this will get the value for the setting name, which in our case is the color picker. So this way, each time the accent color changes, we will reconstruct the inline CSS string and loop through the selectors that we already defined only one time in the PHP, so we don't have to define them again in the JavaScript. And then we will use the current value of the setting that we need to change, which we passed here. The final step now is to append or replace the inline styles with the string that we just constructed. So let's see now. And let's try and change the color. And as you can see, it's now changing in real time. We could have used instead of getting the value this way, we could have used the to variable, which will be the current value for the accent color. But I intended to do it this way just to let you know that you can get the value for the setting using this way. It could be useful if you have maybe you have some button that has a color and another property, background color for example, and these will be two different settings, and in the callback you need to get these two settings. So using the to variable, you'll only have the value of the setting that changed, but you won't have both of them. So using this way you will be able to get any setting by its name. I hope I'm making sense. I know this section might be a little bit complicated, so feel free to watch this lecture again and try to go through this code again and understand it if anything is unclear. And also feel free to leave me a question if you have any inquiry. So that's it for this section. Let's see what we can do next.